I'm Walter Isaacson, and I want to thank you very much for being part of the Aspen Ideas Festival. The Ideas Festival will close right after this in the big green walled tent. We have a very special guest who I'm going to interview, who I think will be interesting, and we'll have some closing remarks. But in some ways, this is the penultimate moment, and for me, the ultimate moment at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Not because Lester Crown is good at drawing a crowd, although clearly he is, although I think half the room is the fourth generation of the Crown family. There's 64 of you here, as far as I can tell. Not only because Lester is the person who understands Israel better than anybody in this room, and that includes Jeff Goldberg. It is because Lester Crown has been the heart and soul, along with Renee Crown, his father Henry Crown, Steve, Jim, Paula, everybody else here, the heart and soul of the Aspen Institute. This place exists because of now 4 generations of members of the Crown family. You're not up here to bask in that glory, but I can't let it pass without saying that and then introducing you, along with Jeff Goldberg, to tell us about Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter, very much, and I want to welcome you all to Lester's bar mitzvah. We're going to clear tables in a little while, and all the Crowns are going to dance a hora.
And the 6 people here that are not members
yeah,
of the
and
family?
all the non-members of the Crown family. No, there are quite a few. There are quite a few here. So I have to say, just adding on to what Walter just said, this is my, I think, 7th year at the festival. I've probably done, I think, 55 panels and interviews and inadvertent stand-up comedy routines. And I have to say that I haven't looked forward to something here the way I've looked forward to sitting down with you, Lester. I've known Lester Crown marginally well for some time. We speak from time to time. This will be the longest conversation we ever have, and I'm really looking forward to it. I don't really have to introduce. Walter mentioned obviously that that Lester is a pillar of the Aspen Institute. He's obviously a pillar of the American business community, and my particular interest and the reason we're here today and the conversation we're going to have is that Lester Crown is probably one of the handful of most important American Jewish leaders of the post-World War II era. And certainly from the perspective of understanding the American Jewish relationship to Israel, he is an indispensable and central figure. But so what I wanted to do is start with a little biography, if you will.
Jeff, before you do, I really want to say to those here that don't, that may not know it, having been involved, fortunately, with the Institute for 25 years, the reason it is what it is because Dave McLaughlin kept it alive for a period of time, and since Walter has been here for the last 10 years, he has taken this just to astronomical heights, and it's been his leadership and everything else that has made the Abstinence Institute really what it is today, which is one of the great, great organizations in the country.
I love Midwestern Modesty. I really do. I'm from New York, so I don't understand it, but I love it. But let's start down this track and talk a little bit about your family and your family's relationship to not only to Israel, but before Israel was even created, the Zionist movement in America in the 30s and 40s. And what I'm interested in understanding is how you absorbed this idea at an early age, and an idea that's carried you through for a very long time. So maybe you could start by a little bit of family biography.
Well, Jeff, the family biography is really a microcosm of many, many families. Grandparents left what they call the Pale of the Settlement, which is the only place where Jews could live in Russia, and came over here somewhere in the 1880s, settled in Chicago, had their whole family, my dad, my uncles, all were brought up there. Because of that, they grew up, first they grew up first in absolute poverty from the time that they started, and then became really quite successful by ingenuity. I think my dad went to 8th grade. We had one uncle that actually went to high school and one that actually became a doctor through nothing but scholarships. The interest, the concern, the perpetuation of Judaism was essential within the family. It was something that was really very important to them, tremendous morality and tremendous sense of ethics. And with that, they really started to progress in the business world, were really quite successful. You know, if we had about 6 or 7 hours, I'd love to tell you the stories. They are marvelous as the things they did and
we
how
do have
they
6 or 7
succeeded.
hours. We're going to be here till they're serving dinner also. Don't worry.
But I know that my mother was a member of Hadassah back in the 30s. I think everyone in the audience really understands in so many ways. With Jews being the scapegoat over the last 3,000 years, whenever it suited whatever country or that they were in, because of that, there was a sense of identity. There was a sense of wanting to perpetuate the traditions which were given to us as kids. Whether it would be from the Orthodox, conservative, or Reform side. And within our family, we had members really of all the different denominations. But the perpetuation of the tradition was exceedingly important. I know the great concerns that my dad and my uncles had with what was happening to the Jewish population in Germany. I know they put up what money they could at that time for trying to help some of those to get out. What Dad was able to do on influence with people he knows, I do not know. But in addition to the Jewish tradition, was the patriotism for the United States. I really always felt that if you ever pricked him in the arm, the blood comes out red, white, and blue. And he felt that just terrifically. So my brother enlisted immediately when the war started, was sent to the Pacific, and my dad was in middle 40s, and he enlisted in the Army and became, as a lieutenant colonel actually, and he ended up really doing a job for the Army. This was one time they made absolutely the right appointment. He ended up being the chief of procurement of the Great Lakes Division. He was sent back to Chicago, actually back home, and the Great Lakes Division of Corps of Engineers bought half of what the Corps of Engineers bought, which was a tremendous number of items and everything else. And the stories on how he saved money for the United States because they had a businessman and not an Army officer in charge. He was promoted to full colonel, received the Legion of Merit, which is the highest award that the Army can award, non-combat, plus a whole group of others from other countries, which, as a matter of fact, I think he had, the remarkable part is he was to be promoted to a brigadier general because of what he did, and he knew if he was promoted to that, he would be put in a different job, which he knew he couldn't do. And in order not to leave the job that he was doing, he was, I guess, one of the few people that turned down promotion to flag rank.
When we were talking before a little bit, you mentioned that the knowledge that came to your father in 1945 about what happened to the Jewish population of Europe changed the way he looked at the world and looked at the Jewish situation. Can you talk about that a little bit and bring us up to his involvement in the creation of the State of Israel?
I know at the dinner table, Dad would come back and say he heard this as a rumor, or he heard this, and that there was no question. Very, very shortly, even by 1942, and certainly by 1943, but during 42, of the existence of the concentration camps and the death camps and what was going on. And the conversation at home was the frustration of not being in a position, actually, of influence in order to be able to influence the United States to do more. You know the story, the St. Louis, the boat being sent back, and all those people died at Auschwitz. As far as our family was concerned, we were lucky. My grandparents, some moved here, some went to South Africa, some went to Israel, and a few were killed in the Holocaust. Just like, almost every other family who was there. But with that knowledge, they tried to do anything that they could to be of help to have Jews get out of Germany. I know when my mother came from Budapest, and that really hit us very hard because, as you recall, the Nazis went into Hungary at the very last minute in the spring of '44, rounded up all the Jewish families completely, and they all went to, most of them went to Auschwitz and Dachau.
So follow this through a little bit. You have the knowledge of what happened. How did the interest in Zionism begin? Did it flow right from that feeling that you had, or that your father had, that there was nothing that he could have done?
To even talk about the idea that there would be a state that welcomed Jews from everywhere. It isn't appealing as the word. To have a safe haven, which is what it was just a dream, an absolute dream. And if you felt this way, and great portion of the Jewish population absolutely did, there was no question you wanted to see that safe haven occur. And therefore, participating, contributing, anything to what became the State of Israel, and after it became the State of Israel, was something you wanted to do. I know we were involved from day one in the raising of money for Israel. And what was remarkable is that time people gave and changed their lifestyle in order to come up with $500 or $1,000 or whatever it is. It very different than today, because I think any fundraising, it doesn't have to be for Jewish causes, it could be for a hospital or the opera or anything else. Especially I can say to everyone sitting in this room, if we all gave twice as much that we're asked, probably wouldn't change our lifestyle one darn bit. At that time, when they were asked to contribute to the formation of the state or the perpetuation of the state, which to me it isn't the eighth miracle of the world, it is the #1 miracle, to have everything against them and all the obstacles, and to actually succeed and to win in '47 and '48 was just amazing, and then to build what they have built over 65 years. I guess we get a chance to talk about what, there is so much good that comes from the number of things that they have developed in medicine and every one of the sciences, in technology, and contributed to humanity. Not for the state, but contributed to absolute humanity is amazing. The list is longer than your arm, and it gets completely washed. People don't think about it or talk or know about it because of the political situation that overshadows it.
Let's come to the politics of it in a minute, and that's the conversation that we've had intermittently over time. But talk just for a couple of minutes more about your involvement since the founding of the state. I think it's worth hearing, this audience hearing, you know, what you've done and who you've known and what you've advocated for to make sure that this project of rebuilding the Jewish state came to fruition.
Well, we've involved in everything we've been asked to do. Going back originally, I remember Dad coming home one day and saying that he was asked by I don't know who from the state, this would be, I guess, in the early 50s, that North American Aviation and one other company, and I don't know what the name of it is, merged. And because they merged, one of them's factory was going out of business. And he was to go and buy the equipment for plane manufacturing from, and not to ask, and no questions were to be asked. He went and he bought all of the equipment from the plant. It ended up being shipped to Israel because of at that time, there was complete embargo from the United States, and what little they got, well, most of what they got was smuggled in. Most of them was illegal, all the arms. That's what Teddy Kollek did. That was his job long before he became a mayor. He was a master smuggler. And he was good. Oh, was he good. But then the French supplied some arms, but they were never sure of what they could get. So this, even though this was for a business jet, they were to use this to make, if they had to, a fighter airplane. They never had to, they never used it, but it was that equipment that started the business jet business that Israel has conducted for a period of time.
So let's go up to the present, and I will tell the audience a little bit about a conversation that we had a couple of years ago. We were talking about President Obama and his relationship with Israel, and we got diverted. We'll come to President Obama, who you know very well, particularly on this issue. But we got diverted because you began to express, and I think you've expressed this to Walter and other people, fears about the future of the state of Israel. And I wanted to, with the backdrop of what you've said, your admiration and your hope and your respect for the state of Israel, maybe you could illuminate for us a little bit about the things that have concerned you, both internally and externally, over the past several years.
Well, I
you
think...
can start with Iran if you want and move domestically, however you want to do it.
You know, from a family standpoint, of course, my family has heard this so many times that we've talked about it. To me, the perpetuation of Judaism is exceedingly important. It's something that I hope goes on for many, many years, because it teaches just the way Christianity does. Real morality, real ethics, the right way to do things. And it has had that moral high ground. Christianity and Judaism has each And it is exceedingly important, as far as I'm concerned, that the Jewish side be maintained in the future. There are only 14 million Jews in the world, and 5.5 million of them are in Israel. 5.5 million of them are here in the United States.
And 3 million in this room.
You mean the 4 that aren't supposed to raise their hand? I don't think, very frankly, the concern, Jeff, that I have is that without Israel, I have concern about the perpetuation of Judaism.
Here.
Why? Internationally, every place. Jews have been really, the only way I can put it is the victims of their own success. The wanting to be accepted, the anti-Semitism, which has been rampant through 3,000 years. A little of it is still here in the United States. There's a lot of it in Europe. But what happened because of the Second World War and afterwards, the acceptance of Jews in almost everything is unbelievable, just remarkable every place. And it is because of that, there is tremendous amount of intermarriage, 50%, and the number of kids that are raised that are Jewish are decreasing in number.
But
So
relate it back to the linkage to Israel. You suggested that the 7 or 8 million Jews who live outside of Israel might not continue as Jews if Israel stopped continuing.
No, I think it needs. I think that's the core. Mm-hmm. I think that is literally to have what we call it a safe haven or anything else, but to have a state of their own that is a Jewish state is, to me, I think it's essential. I do, and very frankly, it's something to be very, very proud of. Proud of the things they do and the things that they accomplish. It doesn't mean everything they do is right in any way at all. Israelis, in many, many cases, are a very arrogant group of people, which I guess if you live in that kind of a region, with the kind of neighbors that you have, there has to be a degree of arrogance in order to be able to live there and stay there.
Well, let's go back to the things that if I asked you, what is the one thing that worries you the most about the future of the state of Israel, what would it be? We don't have to limit it to just one, but why don't we start one that preoccupies your mind?
Well, the region is what, you have a combination of the region. You have, at the present time, things in Doha, Riyadh, the Emirates, Qatar are just superb. You go to any of the other cities and it is, they are building, they are moving ahead, they are just doing absolutely marvelous things. Right next door you have Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, where things are horrible, and Israel is what's, those of you who have been there, it's about this big in total. You go to the West Bank and you're a couple of miles from Ben Gurion Airport and 10 miles from Tel Aviv. So security, from their standpoint, security is all important. And do they overdo it sometimes? Yes, but it is so easy to sit 6,000 miles away and to criticize what somebody else does for their own kids' security.
Well, talk about that a little bit, because I know that you have spoken to Israeli leaders about the occupation of the West Bank and the settlements. So talk about your feelings and your analysis of the direction that Israel is heading in terms of the West Bank.
Well, the only ultimate answer is obviously a two-state solution. There isn't any other answer. There's never going to be a one state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. That is not going to happen. Israel, there's a great difference. Those of you that have been there really know they talk about settlements, the blocks that are part of Israel as such, which are going to stay. The actual settlements that are out in the area, I think that they are, eventually they're going to have to be, the settlers there to have to leave them. As you know, there are really two groups of settlers that occupy entitled the settlements. One were those that were given an incentive to go out there to live.
Economic incentives.
An economic incentive. There wasn't ideology. Then there's a group of primarily ultra-Orthodox who are absolutely impossible, who are out there. Since they're going to have to leave most of them ultimately, to now not offer an incentive to bring a number of them back, I think is wrong. The part that is absolutely wrong is to encourage more to go into what is now the West Bank and should be a Palestinian state. And they deserve it, and they should have one. They should not be encouraging people, as they are, to go out and increase the population. Of course, I told Renee when I came back just a couple months ago that I was talking, as you say, you know, it's a small state, and when you've been involved for a long time, you do get to know most of the people there.
I actually believe you probably do know most of the people there.
Well, in this case, and I don't mind names, because Boogie Yalone is now the Minister of Defense. And in talking to him, I was really trying to say the same thing. I just say, I know Boogie, I know you understand. By the way, this is a three-star general who everybody calls Boogie. At this point, that there is tremendous resentment in the entire world about your moving people into the West, new people into the West Bank. Also, you're taking money out of the Treasury that you don't have, that you need really for other purposes that are important. He said, well, it's very little in dollars and very few in people. I said, well, that's exactly the point. If it is, you get international condemnation, which you deserve for doing it, and you lose some of the moral high ground of the other things you do. You shouldn't be putting people in, you should be pulling them out. Now, the reason even if you did, Israel is not going to make a final deal until they're satisfied on the security side, and that's a very easy thing to say and a very hard thing to do.
Well, let me ask you that. Let's assume for a second, and it's a big assumption given the current government, that they listened to you and pulled out these settlements and created better conditions for negotiations. Do you think that at the end of the day, the Palestinians, even the moderate Palestinians, will accept the reality that Israel exists as a Jewish state and declare an end of claims? In other words, does unraveling the settlement experiment, does it necessarily lead to peace?
Thank you for asking. The answer is no, absolutely not.
Then why do it? I mean, I think we're right now, by the way, at the very core of the dilemma that a lot of American Jews have about Israel. So you, on the one hand, pull out of the West Bank. On the other hand, no particular hope that will lead to peace for Israel.
In time, two things have to change. Much of the Arab world, not all of it, they're marvelous people throughout. I've had very good fortune of traveling the Gulf with friends of mine, and they're just some absolutely wonderful people. But a lot of the Arab world, a lot of the Palestinians have received the television, the newspapers, what's heard in the mosque, what's heard on radio, preaches hatred and encourages violence. Now, to everyone, no, but there is a real feeling of hatred on the Palestinian side. I can't say there isn't on the Israeli side also at that point, but one does not look, the Israelis are not looking to kill the Palestinians. There are enough of the Palestinian side who, if Israel laid down their arms, there'd be a massacre. So I think hopefully in time that can change, and because of the security issue, you may pull the settlers, as many as you can, out, but they will not take the IDF out of either the West Bank or the Jordan Valley until there is much more assurance that the people who occupy the West Bank are the reasonable moderates, are not Hamas. They aren't going to do something that's going to result in Hamas sitting on the West Bank. If far as Jerusalem is concerned, you can sit on the West Bank, and with a .22, you can knock out every window in the Knesset.
Let's come back to something interesting you just said about Bogi Ya'alon, the defense minister. When you go to the leaders of Israel, and you often see them here, you often see them there, going back generations of Israeli leaders, but particularly now, and you say what you just said, why do you get the response or non-response? What do you think is going on in the minds of Netanyahu and Ya'alon and the people around them? Because after all, you're Lester Crown. No one in Israel can doubt your loyalty or your service to the cause of the state of Israel. So they have to grapple with it seriously. But what is not happening between the two of you when you have those face-to-face meetings?
Well, Jeff, I've had that face-to-face meeting with just about everybody that you can mention, and it was said exactly the same thing. Basically, they feel, if they feel differently, and a lot of them don't. A lot of them feel exactly the same way, and a lot of them agree. But those that feel differently just feel that their judgment of what is safer for their country is better than mine. I can tell you, that other than the settler group and the ultra-Orthodox, the rest of the citizens of Israel, and I'd say, we're now talking, maybe 70% or so, would sign a peace agreement tomorrow morning, give the entire West Bank back, just about anything, if they knew that was the peace settlement. If they knew that their lives and their kids weren't in danger the next day, there isn't anything that they wouldn't do. They showed that with Egypt, and that is absolutely what I would say 70% of the Israelis would do tomorrow morning.
Talk about for a second the American Jewish Israel dynamic. One of the things that you've done throughout your career, throughout Israel's existence, is build the bridge between the American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community, the two main Jewish communities in the world. And people like you who have been in leadership positions for decades have built a feeling in the American Jewish community that it's a requirement, not only a requirement, but an honor to support the state of Israel. Talk about that in light of decisions that the Israeli government makes that the majority of American Jews don't necessarily endorse. what is the long-term effect of the, in other words, we for years in the Jewish community have heard the expression, we are one. They're our brothers, we support each other, but something's happening in America where you see, especially among younger people, a kind of confusion or ambivalence about some aspects of Israel that you might not have experienced a generation ago, in the generation of Teddy Kollek or even Yitzhak Rabin.
Well, there's no question. There's the changes. You know, my generation, because of the Holocaust, because of the founding of the state, and everything else, is a very, very deep emotional attachment, and especially when you've gone through really the Second World War and what happened. The next generation, the next two generations down, don't have that emotional, there's no reason for them to have that emotional attachment. So their attachment has to be intellectual, and they have to feel that this has some meaning for them.
Right.
It isn't just an honor. This is something you want to do. If you don't, it isn't like raising really money for the symphony, which was a nice thing to have. This is something I think is
more life or death.
Is more life or death as far as Judaism is concerned, long term, and the people deserve at that point. You don't get the emotional attachment unless you go there. If you go there and spend some time there, I don't care what religion you are and everything else, there becomes a tremendous emotional attachment. You know, whether it be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre part of it, or Stations of the Cross, or anything else, you do. It is a country, and it's a vibrant country. There, people here who don't go think that there's this dark cloud of concern over everything, and that is in the back of everybody's minds. But the streets are full of people. There are more smiles than there are in Omaha. It is a wonderful place to wander around. Women can walk around by themselves at 11 o'clock at night and not worry. And you know, one of the reasons is that in Israel, firearms are not allowed unless military. Unless you're in the army or as part of the military, you can't have a gun. So we're
segueing to the Lester Crown gun control panel right now.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go to questions. I know there are a lot of people who want to talk to Lester about this whole set of issues, and we're going to go to questions in a minute. But let's go to another area of dissonance, let's say, between some Israelis, some American Jews, which is President Obama, who you've supported him and consistently, and you've spent a lot of time trying to bring President Obama and his team closer to the Jewish community and vice versa. Can you talk about a little bit about the controversies of the last 4 or 5 years concerning President Obama and Israel?
Okay. Jim knows the president better than I do, so if I say something wrong, will you raise your hand? Okay. The president is, from times that we have known him when he first came to Chicago, really doesn't have an emotional side, especially compared to the two previous presidents. Both President Bush and Clinton were, let's say, were huggers, and in lots of ways, I guess that's right. The American Jewish community and the Israelis love huggers. They really do. And that's what they experienced, and that's what they.
Well, why is that? Why is that?
Well, I don't know. For good-looking girls around, you like huggers too. But the president is not emotional about his decisions and his feelings. It really is all an intellectual determination on his side, and the Jewish community in the United States that felt that he was anti-Israel, we just felt it was just wrong. He was not. He really tried to be very even-handed, and in being even-handed, I think there was some naivety involved in it, especially the speech in Cairo, without going to Jerusalem afterwards, without that time, that he could not accomplish with the Muslim world what he had hoped to accomplish because much of it is so preconditioned with what they hear from their own newspapers and their own schooling and the mosques.
So you're saying that his approach to the peace process didn't work, despite the fact that he might be pro-Israel.
Right.
Do you think it's changed? Do you think something's changing?
Well, John Kerry doesn't think so, but I would hope there'd be some success. But I don't know, going back to what you talked about before, Jeff, at the present time, Abu Mazen can't make a deal.
The president of the Palestinian Authority. Yeah.
You know, Abu Mazen can't, unless he gets the backing of the really entire Arab world. In fact, you'd want him to have that. And so much of the Arab world at this point is in turmoil that they really aren't paying attention to the Palestinian-Israeli thing. As I think you know, most of the Arab world really don't like the Palestinians. There's not they just like them a heck of a lot better than they like the Israelis. And that's the reason for really for backing them. But right now they are so involved in other things that are more important to them that this is way down on the scale.
I'll ask you one more question on these existential threat issues, and then we'll go to the audience. And I know you've talked to the president about the Iran issue. I know you've talked to Israeli leaders about the Iran issue. I think,
yes, sir.
In fact, I know that Israeli leaders come to you to try to have you explain to them President Obama's thinking on some occasions. So give us your sense of his thinking on what remains the most pressing foreign policy, national security decision in the wider Middle East for the president in the next couple of years. Do you think that if push comes to shove, he will actually order a strike against the Iranian nuclear facilities?
Go back just a little. I think what's important is what the Iranians think. It's what Iran thinks, which is what's important. The answer to your question, as far as I'm concerned, which is probably in the minority in saying to it, I said yes. I think he would. I think two things have happened. I think the Israelis have really, at this point, have subcontracted that decision to the United States, which really is surprising. I think the time has passed when the Israeli Air Force, with a surgical strike, can do the damage that they think needs to be done. The Iranian nuclear program, both in all ways, is right near the top, whether it be in missiles, whether it be in centrifuges, weaponization, mineralization. It is right at the point where they can have a nuclear weapon. It is so close. Now, whether it's within 2 months or 6 months or a year, obviously, I obviously don't know.
But you feel confident that President Obama has this in hand?
I think, I guess if you have a vote in the room, the American public, in my opinion, wants nothing to do with the Middle East at this point. They'd love it to go away. It's been a problem. They just would love to see it go away. And with good reason, the American public after Afghanistan and Iraq doesn't want any more military action in the Middle East at all. And I think the vote would be unbelievably heavily against it. I still think he will pull the trigger when that particular point comes. The real question is, will it be in time or will it be a day late?
And my final and hardest question, I think it's the hardest question, is this. What poses a greater threat to Israel? The Iranian nuclear program or Israel's own policies in the West Bank that, as you would argue, hurt Israel's legitimacy and make it difficult to imagine Israel moving forward into the coming decades as it is right now, a Jewish majority democracy?
Well, you have
the external or the internal?
Well, you have to put it on a time scale. If you take the Iranian thing has to be solved. It just if they have nuclear weapons, what I think will happen, they won't use them on Israel, but they'll become the bully in the area to the point, to our tremendous detriment. The United States is tremendous detriment, and Israel, and they will just authorize Hezbollah to attack Israel, let's say every 2 years, and by attrition, you get 10 years from now, you have no country. Okay. So that has to be taken care of. After that is the internal part of it. They have to solve themselves. People on the West Bank and the situation with the ultra-Orthodox they can't allow this to go on because it's corroding the inside and the whole core of the country.
I think we have mics running around. I saw a hand back there.
This is the one that should be up here with me.
Yeah, no, we'll have him.
Sure.
We'll get him involved. And let's make these, because we've talked for a long time, let's make these questions real questions.
Mr. Crown,
not Jewish questions.
You have...
just 4 statements and then a question. If you don't mind me saying.
I have been an Israel Bonds chairman and a Federation chairman and led UJA trips to Israel for many of the, and got involved for many of the reasons that you cited that your family got involved. You've been a mentor and a hero to me, even though we don't know each other, until Jeffrey Goldberg filled that role 5 years ago. I wanted to ask you a question going forward. You talked about the things that drew you to Israel and Judaism, the feeling of vulnerability after the Holocaust, the need for a Jewish state, the fact that we are one people, the importance of perpetuating Judaism. As you look to the next generation, and you look to our children, 85 to 90% of the Jews now live in Israel or in the United States, where they're not vulnerable. Both countries are military and economic powers. There's virtually no anti-Semitism. They don't see it. Their biggest problem with non-Jews is the fact that most of them want to marry them. And when they look at Judaism, they see it being practiced and meaning such different things in Israel.
I know there's a question in here.
Then it does. What do you think will be the things that will attract this generation of people going forward to Judaism with the same kind of intensity that attracted you and me back when those issues were in a very different place?
You know, that's taught at home. What you're talking about. It isn't the traipsings. It's really, it's the morality, it's the ethics, it's the tradition. But that has to be, if that isn't taught, but that's the same, whether it be Judaism, whether it be Christianity, anything else, those things are taught at home. And the only way of perpetuation is to teach them at home, and hopefully teach them in a way that the kids accept them and believe that it is something meaningful for them. It isn't just something that they have to do because their mother or father said so.
But do you accept the premise that Israel is strong and safe and secure, that Larry is positing?
Yeah, until it gets knocked off the map, it's safe and secure.
Ambassador, right down here in front, if we can get a mic. And why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Kareem Kawar. I'm from Jordan. I'm probably the only Arab in this hall.
Oh, I doubt it.
Married.
If you had to have one in the room, this is the best.
Thank you. So I'm married to Luma, who is of Palestinian heritage as well. And both of us, Lester, we salute your leadership. We salute your efforts and your support to peace. I just wanted to ask a question, which is the Arab Peace Initiative, and I doubt that many people in the audience have heard of it, was presented in 2002. This was signed on by 22 Arab countries. And there's one statement in that initiative that says, the Arab countries affirm the following. One, consider the Arab-Israeli conflict ended and enter into a peace agreement with Israel and provide security for all the states of the region. And I think your concern regarding security, here the Arab countries take on their responsibility to make sure that Israel would be secure. Do you feel that that's something that can be accepted by Israel?
Kareem, that when they presented that in 2002, it was a take it or leave it arrangement that required them to accept the return, all the return, to accept everything that they said. I thought at the present time, and a lot of other people did too, and I completely agree with you, the Israelis answered it no. They should have answered it yes, but. They should have used it for the base of a negotiation, because what they have to have is not a peace agreement with the Palestinians, but with the Arab world. And that was a base. They couldn't accept the right of return. There were a bunch of other things that Saudi Arabia had that the king put into that offer. But that offer was the best thing that's ever been put on the table as the base to move forward. Now it's been talked about being put back. I hope to heck when it comes back again, the answer is yes, but, and then use it as the base.
I thought I saw a hand. Where did I see a hand back there? Yeah, right there. Sorry, it's a big crowded room.
You know, it's good to have these lights because I can't tell whether people are there or not.
Yeah, there's no one here. It's just us and 30 crowns.
Hi, my name's Joel Kipnis. I'm from New York, and my parents were war children of the Holocaust. Really enjoyed this talk, and I have two questions. One is when Clinton, Arafat, and Rabin almost had the peace, can you give us your take as to why Arafat said no, and why the entire world community hasn't kind of, for lack of a better word, acknowledged America and Israel's goodwill in almost doing it? And secondly, do you think it's possible for the Holocaust to happen again?
Just a couple of small questions for you.
The conventional knowledge on the first one is that we, the United States, did not go to the other Arab countries and get their approval, get them to tell Arafat this was okay to accept before. This all came out of the blue, and because of that, this was a surprise, and he didn't feel that he had the backing necessary to do it. Whether he would, whether he would have done it or not, I don't know. I spent an awful lot of time with Arafat in various places, and he could be about as devious as anyone that you would come across. He was not a statesman, he was a revolutionary. And the intifadas that occurred were, now are you hearing it on a biased basis? Of course you are. I don't attempt to be completely objective. That he was losing his position as the head of the revolutionary group, and he had no interest in being a statesman.
And the second part? The second part was that could another Holocaust happen?
Could another Holocaust happen?
Yeah.
Well, it could with a nuclear bomb, yeah.
Let me just ask you something, because you prompted a thought. You spoke eloquently about Israel's dynamism, and you know, we all know the stories of the Nobel Prizes and the industry and innovation. A lot of people who write about the politics of Israel, including many Israelis, wonder about the vitality of the political class as opposed to the vitality of every other group in the country. Could you just talk for 1 second about, and since you've known so many of these people personally, talk about who you think was a great Israeli leader, and try to answer, if you can, the problem of politics right now in Israel. But you go pretty far back.
Well, Rabin had I think, Ben-Gurion founded, that really they all made tremendous contributions to the country and to its progress forward. I think Rabin as a matter of fact, yes, Jeff, I will never forget this group I was with had a meeting both with Mubarak, King Abdullah in fact, it was Crown Prince Abdullah at that time in Saudi Arabia, and Rabin, and with Assad in Damascus during one trip, and all four of them said exactly the same thing voluntarily when we were just talking. They said, the concern in the future that you, the rest of the world, have to worry about is extremism. Says that is what is going to disrupt and is going to harm this whole area. And they all four saw it the same way.
Let me just call on Walter for a second, if I can. Can I get a mic?
I'm supposed to answer a question for a guy
I just
that wrote
wanted to
Einstein?
hear Walter on this conversation.
Actually, first of all, thanks, Lester. Thank you all very much. Maybe we could end by saying, if you were to sit there, right, with Netanyahu in the cabinet, what would you tell him right now?
Exactly what I've said here. I have, but that doesn't, because I tell him, Walter, that doesn't mean, I can tell him and a lot of other people can tell him, he still has the responsibility to make the determination. Whether his sincerity, whether he really believes doing nothing is better for the security of Israel, or whether he is just risk averse, I cannot answer. I don't know. It is one or the other.
But do you think then it's an existential threat to Israel to just keep on this path and be risk averse?
I'm sorry, that the Iranian threat...
Israel's existence almost if it doesn't try to get to the two-state solution.
Right now, it is, the two-state solution is way, way down the scale. The Iranian situation is 1, 2, and 3 of importance to Netanyahu and to the Israeli people.
But let me just add on to that. I think what Walter is asking is should he be paying more attention to this other problem now in order to, as Rabin did, for instance, in order to forestall greater problems down the line?
It would certainly be better if you did, there's no question. And in answer to your question, there is a great concern on the up-and-coming leadership. There aren't the kind of people that at least that I know or have been introduced to by the Meridors and who have really run the country for some time. They have a dearth of leadership at the present time. There's no question about it, and that is a very, very great concern.
Thank you very much, Lester. Thank you.